Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. Another year comes to a close, and still, I think, nobody knows what it takes to make secure code, whether in C or Rust or Node. We have all these lists of top 10, repeated again and again. Let's try a new AppSec baseline and talk about secure design. Which means, this week we chat with John Kinsella about our 2024 AppSec Year in Review. Check your defaults and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The Level Blue Futures Report 2024 sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledged increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business contexts that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today. Visit securityweekly.com/levelblue. Cybersecurity simplified. This is episode 310, recorded December 9th, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. And John, it has been a while since I've seen you.
I missed you last week, so great to see you. Welcome back.
Great to see you. You and Adrian had lots of fun, so hopefully listeners, please go back. If you haven't already, go back and listen to all those November episodes. John was in a good mood, and John was exploring AI, which we're going to have to touch on because, John, I thought we'd take this first segment and do a little bit of a look back on 2024, obviously from a bit of a perspective of AppSec Weekly, our show here. One of the things I wanted to touch on first is we actually had a couple conversations with leaders or participants of OWASP projects. So speaking of the OWASP Top 10, we do love to poke at that every once in a while, but we did start off with a discussion with Grant Ungers about the OWASP Product Security Capabilities Framework. And this is one of those things that's related to SAM in the sense of a maturity model, but it's more of what activities are you doing? What should you be doing? This was a discussion early in the year. I think in March it rolled out with their website, and there hasn't been a lot of activity on this, at least on the GitHub project for it since, but I think that's possibly one of those aspects because it just needs to get out there, settle, and needs to get some traction. And it's that traction part, though, is what I'm not sure of. I don't see it being talked about, being advertised a lot, so I'm not sure if it's even come across your radar recently or something like that.
Hasn't come across my radar. I got to say, just sort of funny is I'm frequently Googling in the background as we talk about things to sort of look for different aspects on them. There's an OWASP product security guide and an OWASP product security capability framework. So from step one, we're already confusing the folks. They're both at, really young versions. I get it, as you said, that the repo is when we talked about this earlier in the year, I love the idea of it. But I think that the question I asked then and now is like, why is this needed, right? It's it feels like, and I don't mean this in a bad way. It's open source community. We can work on whatever we want. But one of the senses I have with OWASP is they're very open to building new wheels, and the aspect of that there that I'm poking at is like, would it make sense to maybe go and look at the previous wheel and say, hey, can we improve or make it rounder or add more spokes or lighter or faster? And I'm not positive. I think it's always great to try these different things, but how do you keep the learning going from that? That's what's sort of interesting to me is this framework going to hopefully catch on and become popular maybe in 25? But on the other side, if it just, I don't want to say languishes there, but languishes there, or can we learn something from that and bring it back into other frameworks is what I'd really love to see.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of that, we'll call it, I don't know if that's fully self-reflection, but there was some reflection that we had on OWASP because we also talked with Dustin Lair about the OWASP Dev Days that was actually canceled. So again, not trying to be fully a downer at the moment, but part of that was, in talking with Dustin, was they didn't get a lot of engagement with developers, and it was more about, here is OWASP as an AppSec entity that lots of people, obviously our listeners within AppSec, know about and care about. Lots of them are paying members. But the sphere of influence seems to fizzle out a little bit as you start to get into developers. And that's what that conversation with Dustin brought up. And related to Dustin's work, we talked with Marissa Fagan about the OWASP Security Champions Guide. So here we're going with here's our language. We're going from a framework to another guide. This was a discussion in August. This one, however, in our conversation with Marissa, it did have a lot of that feedback loops that was getting to the point where they released this guide. And there has the GitHub project, at least related to this, has been actively maintained, has been updated within the last couple of weeks. So that's one of those things that maybe that will be the lesson to learn, or the project to learn from, in the sense of what you were, I think, touching on about fostering, pulling feedback from the ostensible audience and figuring out, is this delivering value? Is this solving a problem that developers have or AppSec teams have?
I think possibly as we sort of think through this, one of the interesting parts about open source, so sometimes you can build something which is like solves a need and everyone goes, oh my God, I've been waiting for this for the last 10 years, and they just download and use it, and like it grows like crazy. I think a lot more common is someone has an idea, they get excited about it, they build it. Let me back up a sec. It's not a lot more common. This is the more common for success. They have an idea, they build it, they've got the charisma or the enthusiasm to go and like get people excited about it and go like, this is why this is awesome and why you should be using it and why it's awesome. So we look for founders too. But I think it'd be interesting to see. And again, I don't want to point fingers at people or even really compare people under a microscope, but it'd be interesting to see from some of these different projects, are some of them better at the rah-rah part than others? And would that be part of why they're more successful? And for our listeners, take that back into your office of like, okay, if you want to get like a project through with your boss or your boss's boss, it's not just going like, hey, write the paper, I've got this, it's great. It's like, how do you actually get people excited to go and do that? So might be interesting to look at.
That would be, and that's going to, you throw me onto that tangent about, that's a wonderful highlight skill to say, it's not just about how good of a pen tester you are, how well you can remember the OWASP top 10, how good you can describe cross-site scripting versus SQL injection. You're highlighting that skill of communication and rah-rah. I love that phrase. That I think I've tried to pull in some as topics on several of the episodes. But ironically, John, some of those episodes have been the least watched as well. So it's funny to have that tension between us, or at least me thinking communication is an important skill, versus getting our audience to like, just pay attention and do what we're saying because communication is an important skill. And it's not necessarily the most exciting skill, perhaps.
What's the phrase? Do as I do, don't do as I say. Do as I say, not do as I do, yeah.
Exactly. So speaking of do as I say, we had a couple more OWASP related projects I want to hit on real quick. We talked with Farshad Abbasi, friend of the show. He's been back a couple times going over the news with me, sharing his insights. We love him. He's been working on the secure pipeline verification standard. So this would be at least our third verification standard, I think, out of OWASP. And as always, it's sort of like, how much do we need a new VS versus a new, and a new top 10 in this particular domain? But we talked with him beginning of the year. The first public draft for this came out in November. So there's actually forward progress. And so the audience, check our show notes for this list of projects that we're talking over. Go check that out and see what about the secure pipeline is useful here or is different here. And I think I'm going to make a callback to this when we get to the news segment later on. But the other one, quick, John, again, possibly we'll save this for the news segment, the OWASP top 10 for LLM applications. it's already got its 2025 version ready. Christmas came early for everyone. So this was updated this November, and we can dive into that. But let's save, I see you smiling, but I'm going to ask you to save your energy for the news segment on that one, because speaking of, let's go back to that rah-rah phrase. We're going to have to revive your T-shirt slogans. One OWASP related project was Zap. Now, technically, Zap did depart from OWASP all the way back in August 2023, but we were talking with Simon throughout this year, and poor Zap went from OWASP to the Software Security Project to Mark Curphey's Crash Override with Open Source Fellowship, and then finally, after a bunch of turmoil, eventually landed this September with checkmarks. So commercial support for it, but this is Zap driven by checkmark. Zap does not own, or sorry, checkmarks does not own Zap. I don't know that Zap wants to own checkmarks. I think Simon is happy just focusing on his area. But that I think is one of those success areas that did have that enthusiasm and honestly charisma from Simon that is a callback to what you were describing a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and also I do think it's a smart move on Checkmarks' spot on their sides to let it live as an open source project, right? That's a lot of companies out there are going to try and go, oh, we need to make that ours, so no, our competitors can't use it. And like, oh, all this effort we're putting into it, and like you can feel the CEOs are like clutching their pearls. But I think for these projects to really continue to exist, and I mean, there's a reason it got as big as it was, and it was, I mean, obviously it was because of a single contributor, but also there's a community around it, and like if that community suddenly doesn't like you or decides to fork it or go in a different direction, we've seen a few of these in different cases last year. So kudos to them for that. I was going back looking briefly at the SPVS, Secure Pipeline Verification Standard. It's I think, Mike, for me on that one, this is such, and I think I've said a few times over the years, this one I like. It's an area where I think a lot of us really don't look a lot at the pipeline, right? How do you make that thing secure? Especially in large organizations, as you have like a more complex pipeline, or if you have more things you need to do, or you have a larger deployment area, or how do you make sure that, how do you really guarantee the security of what you're putting out there? It's not just as simple as compile, sign it, and throw it out. I mean, that works if you're in a very modern company using just Kubernetes and nothing else. And even then, probably not. But for a lot of these more complex things, right, it's like, how do you do if you're going to have everything end-to-end in that pipeline, how do you do all those things in such a way which are not just do all the things you want, but as over time as you change something that, that pipeline remains healthy and secure. And it's, I think probably if I had to like suggest like what people should be thinking looking back at the year, this would probably be the top ones, I think.
Interesting. I think too, it's one of my personal tests is also this, the SPVS doesn't just boil down to use SigStore. Yes. Which is sort of like, well, we could have just written this in one sentence. So you're pointing out that there's a lot of other nuance and complexity that actually ties into a lot of process around the delivering secure software.
Yeah.
I want to pull you now into the realm of AI, because AI was definitely something we talked about over the year. It is not going away. We did, or at least I tended to talk about it in the sense of, well, maybe two senses. One, where is it useful? Not being fully skeptical, but just trying to be like not overly enthusiastic for the sake of AI is new and shiny, more of what can it solve for me personally, I will admit, but also looking at AIs in the sense of, like on the topic of Zap, how is AI being used to find vulnerabilities? And we've seen some, we had the AI Cyber Challenge this year, the semifinals. We'll have the finals next year at DEF CON. We had some blog posts from Google Project Zero talking about using mostly LLMs to guide fuzzers rather than LLM as a pure, here is Go look at this code and tell me what's wrong. But we did cover some other blog posts along those lines that was starting to find, I want to say, very simple or obvious grep-like vulnerabilities in the sense of you could grep for this type of buffer overflow. So I haven't fully embraced AI as the idea that it's going to be better than just using grep for the most part. But I will acknowledge that it's definitely a time saver, although a little bit of a time waster as well. So yeah, let's hear your views on this.
I'll tell you a story offline about the time waster part. I'll leave it at that. Oh man, so I remain jaded on the LLMs, right? So I'm still going to do my rainbow hands and machine learning. I think, and it's I've been trying to talk to this about our listeners when you were out a little bit. It's on my radar a lot, right? Because all these groups you just mentioned everyone's looking at it, try to figure out either, hey, is there something useful here? Yeah. Or, hey, how can I find something useful to impress my boss? Or, hey, how can I find something useful enough just to get some money from the VC? So like everyone's looking for it is a bit of a gold rush right now. Not right now, for the last 3 years? There's uses for it, right? It's getting closer now where like I might be making jokes about some of the potential use cases to coworkers where a year or two ago I wouldn't have thought of those jokes. So that's something. I think it's hard for us in security compared to maybe retail or I don't know, some of the more softer things out there. Because in security, we're like, if the answer's wrong, oh boy, you could be really making a huge mistake, particularly on the operational side. So how can I trust that thing to really be that accurate? And the problem there is, if it's that accurate, then that means it's been overtrained. So how that's sort of the problem I have here. There's a bit of a paradox. I think it's funny. I did like the idea of like using it to help sort of maybe. Back in like our code review days of like a directed code review saying like, hey, there might be a problem here, or maybe I liked the idea of pointing the fuzzer in a direction, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I don't know. I think it's going to take 2025 for us to try and get a better sense of like not just the technology becoming better, but also us trying to figure out as humans, what do we do with this thing? I'm not writing it off yet. It's definitely, I'm not as jaded as some of my friends are, but I'm still just trying to figure out where do I actually have faith in it.
Yeah, and I think, and to be clear too, I think one of those aspects is we're very much talking about right now generative AI and LLMs, things like the ML side of AI. If we want to be, maybe just be loose with AI as the term, that has been around for fraud detection, log analysis, etc. Almost in the way that it's so banal, it's just not exciting. So we'll acknowledge that up front real quick, but to your point as well, so far I haven't seen, a lot of what I've seen people talking about using LLMs is saving developer time, saving an AppSec engineer time, but maybe if we're talking about using LLMs to patch third-party dependencies, I'd much rather do something more fundamental there, like lean into that Dependabot style curation that doesn't need AI. Just we tested your code, approve this merge, or even something better that can help that, rather than just sort of use automation for so much noise that we're generating. What if we generated less noise? That's my hypothesis there. But there's other things that happened this year that wasn't just AI, and maybe this ties back to your thinking on the secure pipeline verification standard there, John. Back in February, if you recall, everybody was pretty excited for various reasons about the XZ Utils backdoor. Yeah. So this was something that I don't think, Farshad and I actually got to talk about it. I don't know that you and I have talked about it. So let me throw it over to you to start us off on your thoughts on this.
At least on my radar, it sort of fizzled out. I did see something in the news in the last 2 days. I haven't clicked on it yet, but it looks like someone's looking to get rid of the compression in the Linux kernel boot. So vaguely related. I'm not sure the reasoning or if they're actually going to pull it off, because that's a pretty good hat trick. But I mean, it in and of itself, I heard, I don't know about you, but I heard no big things around it, right? It was sort of like, oh my God, crazy. And then, we all went about our life.
Yeah, we did. And there was the aspects of the perennial discussion around open source, funding open source. Everybody pulls out the one cliche XKCD comic that, okay, is overused. And we pointed to like the troubles that even a security tool like Zap was having for the last year and a half. But I think too, there is some aspect of identity that's going to be for, let's call it for critical open source projects, that the maintainers are going to, there's going to be a tension there between here is your identity and there's a little bit, call it degradation of anonymity or maybe a bit of privacy, just because there does have to be trust. And it's not just that we put the trust in people only, but we have to understand how is stewardship of a project changing? Because we saw a similar thing with Polyfill as well, just with here's a project, owners changed, and there were bad consequences.
You know what's interesting about that, though? I bet you can do that in a privacy-friendly way. So you want to know the, I'm forgetting the word, but you want to know the history of a developer and sort of their background. But that could be developer number 43 on GitHub, right? Like if they've been here for years and they've been committing and like they've got their code signing and like everything they've done is good, cool. Do we need to know that that's Frank Jones at 1493 Main Street or something? Probably not, I don't think. But for a new person, I guess, how do they actually start building up that reputation? I don't know. I think there's a space there, but it's how you do it. And I know people have put so much study into this, but like, how do you do it without actually giving away too much of your personal self? Yeah.
Right. And that's where there's that reputational hacking. Then we saw a little bit of that with XZ Utils backdoor. They did have 3 or 4 sock puppets that were basically just showed up to say, oh, hey, how come nobody's fixed these bugs? Would somebody only, if only there was someone who would come and fix these bugs in this project. And then Jian Tang, if I remember the name correctly, came in and said, oh, I'll help you fix these bugs. And so there was, but it was very shallow depth of participation, both in the project as well as just a presence online. So I think you're hitting something interesting there. We did have more fun rolling forward in time. We had a really fun April Fool's episode. So if you want to hear more from me, Adrian, and Akira, in April, since the show did fall on April 1st, rather than deal with the news as if it was April 2024, we did it as if it were April 2004. And maybe we'll have to have you go back and listen to it, John, and quiz you to figure out, was this article from 2004 or 2024? Because I think some of them are.
I did listen to it. You guys did a great job. And yeah, some of them, I think at least one of them would have caught me off guard, yeah.
Yeah, and we did that around the time of RSA. So the other thing that did come out of RSA that we need to highlight is that CISA Secure by Design pledge. So this is one of those things that I think goes on to at least your 6 months later check-in, yes. Just to see, people pledge. There's not really teeth, we can say, on this. It's not like CISA is enforcing this or there are consequences. But ideally, at least I want to look at this from an optimistic perspective, in the sense of what are companies doing in a transparent way? They're demonstrating where they invested security efforts that had a payoff, that actually improve security for their systems, improve security for their software, that also reduced bugs, reduced the overhead, reduced the maintenance for it. So that's what I'm hoping to see out of secure design. I think it's probably still too early. We need to wait that full year, perhaps, before we see anything really good from it.
I guess the one thing's been on my mind this weekend from actually from a Formula One point of view. I won't go into the story, but like when you create something like this, what we should be doing, even ourselves, is saying not just 6 months later, but what are those indicators we're going to be looking at in 6 months? How do we know if this is successful or not? I think this is a great example. Okay, cool, people signed a pledge, but what do you do with that? Do we go, okay, well, is there some meaningful improvement that they've done in their software development lifecycle, or is there less bugs coming out, or what? It's very simple to not even sign a piece of paper like check your name into a GitHub repo, but what's the actual measurement out of that? How do you know you've improved or not improved? So maybe that's one of our things for 2025 to try and come up with that a little better.
That would be good, and we can perhaps take Microsoft Recall. I don't have the timeline for it because it was announced, then unannounced, then reannounced, then unannounced, and it's going through some iterations because it did absolutely need a bit more secure. Well, I say a bit more, perhaps a lot more secure by design. But that's probably one of those good examples to see where were the design misses. How and maybe process-wise, org-wise, how did these, let's say, obvious misses happen rather than someone just hold up their hand and say, we're not encrypting this, or what are the ick concerns to address, for lack of a better technical term. So maybe that's a good thing that we'll also be watching throughout 2025.
That was an interesting one in that the functionality of it was scary enough that I was hearing like non-techie people, like out in sort of general public press, talk about, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what Microsoft is thinking about doing. They want to screen capture everything on your screen, and like I get what they're trying to do, and I do see the value in it. But like what's interesting also is like it's so personal, I guess, that a lot of the general public, I think, also are having a reaction to, like, oh my God, you want me to trust you to do that? So it'd be interesting to see if they can pull it off, how to do it securely or how to do it in a privacy-facing way. That's going to be a tough hill for them to do, I think.
And I'm going to pull or go back to that theme of communication, because I do personally like that. Compare what Apple did and how they announced like private cloud compute and what they're doing with everyone's personal data, feeding it into a generative AI, versus how Microsoft rolled out Recall. And Microsoft did here's the technical thing, it's really cool, a screenshot, it's going to help you remember something that you were thinking about in your browser a month ago. And then they followed up with here's how we're going to change and improve its privacy, here's how it's going to protect you, whereas Apple did kind of the reverse of that timeline. They said, here's what the design were. Here is what a lot of the concerns we anticipate people would have, and we're going to preemptively demonstrate how we address them, or the areas that can't be addressed or that have different problems or different solutions needed.
It almost felt like the Microsoft, I would say method, but the game book they used here was almost closer to like an Android book of like, here's the nerdy details. Not like it didn't have the standard Microsoft whitewash on it. It was sort of interesting, but they'll get it right, I'm sure.
Speaking of nerdy details, John, I know you keep a list of T-shirt slogans that we're going to have to check back in on. Do you also keep that list of, speaking of 6 months later, things that you are looking forward to in the sense of what's happening with them? Do you want to give us a tease of what's on your list maybe for 2025? What are some things that we should be checking back in on that we talked about this year?
We've talked through a few of them. Let's see. We talked probably. I need to be putting dates on these when I put them in this list. We talked a little bit about what CSA was doing with AI and MITRE and Embed. So I think we need to check back in with those guys and sort of see what's going on with them. Let's see what else. We've talked about a few of these different frameworks and things. One of the ones that was on my list was the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark. Is that working or not? It's still out there. I did a little Google and it's around. We've talked about Zap already. I think that's probably one of our more popular ones for the year. So we'll keep checking on what those guys are doing. Poor old Akira has temporarily left us, but I had one on my list. Akira is joining the open source projects to help with AppSec. Akira, how are you doing on that? Secure by Design pledge. We've talked about that. I think that needs, again, something to check in on. And then the last one on my list was a 12 month later, actually not 6 months later, which is what is the result of Satya Nadella's secure email to the company around all your bonuses are going to go up in smoke if you do not start thinking more about security. So it sounded nice, but I think that'll be one of the ones to see. I actually don't know what their bonus or their schedule is, so I should figure that out and then go and look and see if there's a up or down that they're willing to talk about publicly. Probably not, but
I wonder. This is where we could. This is where I imagine someone like Adrian gets interested, and we can let him loose on scraping LinkedIn to go look to see how many Microsoft employees are now looking for jobs or switching jobs because perhaps they're getting lower bonuses or something. Maybe that's our proxy variable for this.
Come on, Adrian.
Come on, Adrian, we need you back. Well, John, this was a fun way to catch up for 2024. We're going to do the same thing. Basically, I try to avoid predictions for 2025, but we will, as a teaser, in early 2025, have a little bit of that looking forward for the rest of the year. So we'll do that look ahead, but now we're starting to wrap things up, and we got to wrap up this segment. So I got to say thank you once again. Thank you to our listeners. We're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.